So we get back, and then my German training says, demonstrate German training from this Nazi. So I went around the room and I told them about habits that they all had. Okay, here's a man who smokes. He smokes cigars. Here's a man from the Sinton. This is a man who has trouble with his feet because his shoe balance, the backs of the shoes are done. See, I had observed all these things because when you're trailing someone as a spy, you're trying to keep up with them. You have to. They could take the coat off and the hat off, but you can't change the shoes. So the heels of the shoes tell you how to follow when all these other accidentals have been changed. Our family are old-time Detroiters. My mother graduated Cass Tech in 1924, so that gives you an idea. And like others, it was her oldest sister that left Kentucky as a grade school teacher and went to Detroit. But of course, in Detroit at that time, this is now in the 20s, that blacks were not, it's just after World War I, and blacks are not given an opportunity to teach at all. And Jews are primarily the teachers of the black community because they don't want them in the white community. Okay? The community itself was a wonderful experience because everything was black. The only time you encountered whites as a small child, 5, 4, was a police officer that was on patrol, and they were a mounted police. So they just rode down the street on the evening before going back to the stalls. Go down one street and then come up the other on the way. That was it. You'd wave at the police officer. The other time is when you can go to the hospital, they'll be white. And if you were old enough to go to school, they would be white teachers. But that's the only white groups of white people that you'd ever see. Our family doctor, there was a black hospital, ministers, everything was in that black community. Classical music, anything that you thought you might want was within that community. And so growing up in that community, I felt very comforted, very stable. And then when I finished the 6th grade at Balch Elementary School, Garfield was the intermediate school. But instead of going to Garfield, because it had such a bad reputation, fights and all that, some selected blacks were elected to go all the way across the city to McMichael, which was where Northwestern is, at Grand River and East and West Grand Boulevard, that intersection. Now that was my first experience of being or seeing whites on a daily basis. And boys, are boys, but there were a lot of differences between us in terms of hygiene and things like that. So that was my first kind of stark experience dealing with whites. It was a kind of negative. And then the other thing was, they weren't as smart as we were told that they were. Okay? So those were 2 light bulbs going off. Now on the west side, at that time, there was a small black community. And they owned their own homes. That's why they were there. They were generally double income, or at least one fixed income, where in the factories, everyone else's father would be off so many months and then back on and off and what have you. But for that community of West Side people, they had either a barbershop or something in terms of business that they had that enabled them to buy a home. All right, now, what was very important is that their children now are really upper middle class. All of their parents, for the most part, are college graduates. Now, they may have come from the South as a college graduate, but they were all college graduates. And that said that you had 2 groups of children coming together, black, with a common foe or enemy, if you will, or whiteness and the manifestation of it. And our task was to outsmart them, outdo them, and because they were blue-collar children, and I was blue-collar coming from the other side of the city. But you had these middle-class blacks that really knew how to do things. The first time I heard Paul Laurence Dunbar, we all had to do a poem. And this girl came and did a whole series of Paul Laurence Dunbar's poems. And it was a new door opening for me. Now, my father was quite aware of everything that was going on because he read Crisis. That was a magazine that came out, I don't know whether it's monthly or quarterly, but I can see him sitting in the chair with a light lamp by his shoulder, reading Crisis and smoking his cigar. He smoked cigars. Now, that's the reality of the community in which I grew up. Now, in terms of the racism, you have a red line district. It's closed. It's like you're in a ghetto or in a cauldron or in a silo. Blacks can't come out of that. They have to live in there. As the war started and there were more jobs available, you had more people coming from the South. But because the walls of the ghetto are not going to bend, what you have to do is subdivide the housing that exists to make it accommodate all these people coming in. So what was a 6-room flat? Now, we always follow Jews. You have to recognize that. The whites leave, the Jews go in, and then the blacks go in after the Jews. Okay? That's how the racism was at that time, anti-Semitism. By the time you get what was a 6-room flat, that's 3 bedrooms, living room, dining room, kitchen, and 1 bath. As more people came, then those spaces, there was no place to go, so your spaces had to be divided. So in each bedroom, you'd have a family, mother, father, and 2 children. They slept on the floor on a pallet, and the parents slept in the bed. Now, 3 sets of 4 is 12. So you now have 12 people in the 3 bedrooms. The dining room was divided by thick curtains. These are kind of like a drapery, all right? And there you would have a bed, and a couple would sleep on that bed. So 4, 8, 12, and 2, okay, is 14. A man would sleep on the couch that worked nights because he could come in and sleep on the couch during the day, all right? So you have 4, 8, 12, 16, 17. You have 17 people using the same bathroom, 17 people using the same kitchen. Now, that was the existentialistic reality. My family was lucky enough to have our own apartment. It was 3 rooms, a bedroom, a major room like a living room, a bath, and a kitchen. Because what had been a 6-room was now divided into 2 3-room apartments. Here's where you see systemic racism corroborating and reinforcing the racist behavior. The Department of Health, in code for construction and sanitation, says that any bathroom has to have a window for ventilation, or a shaft is sunk down through the building, and you have windows and little air vents that went into the shaft to take the foul air out of the bathrooms and exit it out of the building. Because they had divided, there was only 1 bathroom. The bathroom was in apartment A. We were apartment B in the back. There was a storage room that you put trunks in. Years ago, people used to have big trunks, and they had to store them because you traveled and moved. So the storage room was for the trunks. They took the storage room and made a bathroom out of it. The bathroom was a 4-foot tub, a triangular sink that's set in the corner, and a stool. Now, according to the code for health and law, there was no bathroom in the closet. And if they had sunk a shaft through the building to ventilate, it would have taken up too much space and you couldn't have had the bathroom. So now this is the collusion of the state against black people in a racist way. I'm 4 years old. We're in our apartment. Now, a white man, see, I'm telling you white man because we don't see them often, comes up and he knocks on the door and he says, he's here to ventilate the bath. He said, but I've got to go downstairs and get my horses. Well, at 4, I know what a horse looks like because the police drive by on them every day. But why is he got to bring horses in here? He was talking about carpenter benches, that you could lay something across the 2 benches and do what you need to do. He took the door off the hinges. He drilled with an auger 3 1-inch holes in the top of the door, 3 1-inch holes in the bottom. Put the door back on the hinges. Didn't even sweep up the shavings. Took his horses and left. Now, the code approved that as ventilation for the bathroom, which means all the foul air in the bathroom goes right out into the living room, the rest of the house. Okay? Now, the reason I share that with you is because you must be conscious of how long this has been going on. It isn't something new, and it is one of the sources for generational trauma. Outside of Detroit now, blacks are earning enough money to buy a new house, but there's no place that they're going to sell you in the suburbs a new house. It's illegal, legally. So you want to look at the color of law, and that will give you a lot of information. Now, there was outside of Detroit, 14 miles away, there was a 1 square mile township called Inkster, Michigan. It was village-like, okay? You had lots of empty land and what have you. And houses could be built there, a brand new house. So we watched our house being built from the ground basement all the way up into this beautiful little home. And we moved in. And that was perhaps one of the happiest years of my life. I joined the Boy Scouts, and it was a wonderful time. And you could catch snakes and grasshoppers and all kinds of things. And you get tadpoles, and you raise them in your mother's pan, cooking cake pans. So it was a wonderful time. Now, my father had asthma, and it was so bad in that rural area that we had to move back to Detroit, okay? Now, my father has the asthma, and he goes out to Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm in the last half of the 11th grade, and we transfer out to Salt Lake City, Utah. That is when the Mormons had made the determination that as blacks we had no soul. Therefore, we could not receive the Melchizedek priesthood, okay? I go down to the Board of Education to find out what is the high school to which I must attend. Well, there are 3. There's East, South, and West High School. So she said, what is your address? I said, 255 East, 7 South. She said, oh, that's East High School District. I said, what is the academic high school? She said, East. I said, well, I'll go there. You might be more comfortable at West. Okay, that's where all of those people live. There weren't that many blacks there, so it's all Mexicans and other people, Native Americans, and those people go to West. So I said, well, how many of my kind are there? And she said, there's a lot. She looked at the other car. She said, I think there are 11 or 12. I said, well, I'll meet them all on one Saturday afternoon. Now, why I share that with you is because when I went to East High School, there were no blacks. I was the only black there. I was the first black there, the only one to graduate from there at that time. This is 1948. And when I graduated, they rezoned the city not to make that error of anybody coming in from that should be going to the other schools. Okay? Now, my experience in the school, to the credit of the Mormon kids, they were not racist. But you're not Mormon, so you're not included into many things. And I have always been a troublemaker and a smartass. So they invited me to come to their little catechism class, and just to kind of see how it worked and what have you. And I went there, and I asked the man if it is possible for Joseph Smith, who is the founder of the religion, to have made a theological error? And he said, no, he's Joseph Smith, he knows everything. I said, well, then if he does not make a theological error, can you explain to me how he gave the Melchizedek priesthood to his bodyguard, a black man, saved his life numerous times? And later, after he's given it to black people, why is it now that I can't receive it? He said, here, take this book. It's called The Pearl of Great Price, and go read that. And in essence, and never come back here again. Okay. I also, for my sociology class, I went to the library because they have all these revelations that come up from time to time. The head of the church has a big revelation and things change. Well, Utah wanted to become a state, but they said, no, you cannot be a state because you have polygamy. Okay? Well, the head of the church has a revelation about polygamy. No more polygamy. And I looked at other events like that through history, and in my sociology class, when I gave my report, I just happened to bring these things up. So, you know that. And the other thing is, anything that happened about black people or anything in the country, the only authority, of course, was Nichols, who was, what, 16? So I know about everything, all right. So that's that's kind of the background. Now I come back to Detroit. I don't have any marketable skills. I work in a hardware store. I've been working there since I was 13. So that's a job. But any marketable skills where I can pay my way to go to college, that's what I was trying to do. So I spent a year, I had graduated a year early, so I spent a year at Lewis Business College. All right, Lewis Business College was a black business college. They taught you shorthand, typing, bookkeeping, and so on. I went there for a year. I learned to type. I learned to take shorthand. I could do bookkeeping, and I could file. Now I had some marketable skills. And the way she did it, you didn't have to pay all your tuition at one time. You could pay it in installments. So you see, it was a perfect opportunity for me to get the skills I needed. Now when I go into the Army, nobody has these skills. So I'm secretary to the colonel. And any place the colonel is warm and dry. Anybody else is wet and cold, okay? The reason I share that with you is because children sometimes think they have to go to college. Well, I did go to college, but my parents couldn't afford to send me. So I had to have marketable skills so I could pay my way through school. And that's what I ultimately did. Now the GI Bill helped because I came back from the service. At this point, I go to Assumption College, which is across the river. It's now the University of Windsor, but at that time it was Assumption College. Historically, it was a men's college, and then later, when I got there, it was the first time they brought women into the classrooms. Then they made it into a university, and Father Swan was the registrar. He was the perfect person as a religious. He was gifted and talented, and he was loving and caring. There were other guys there that were like, I won't talk about them because it's Christian charity said I should not, but I won't. Now, when I'm ready now for a master's degree, University of Michigan State have the best programs in industrial psychology, which is a 2-year terminal degree, which says that with a master's degree in industrial psychology, you can work in factories, improve their productivity, and they hire you as a junior vice president. And your question is that with stock? Okay? Now, I have all the credentials from Canada, so there's nothing wrong with my grades. I go to apply. This is how the North does. In the South, they tell you go to the black school, or they'll pay for you to go to a northern school. But in the North, it's subtle, and this is how the game is played. Candidate Nichols, you have to do a 1-year practicum. There's a list of companies screaming for people to come from the ceiling to the floor to reorganize their thing and make them more profitable. Semicolon, however, comma, none of them would take black Nichols. Now, instead of the university saying, we will find one, we will develop one, we will make one, their answer was, it would be unfair for us to accept you in the program, realizing that you could not fulfill the requirements for graduation. So you're out. Okay? Now, this loving black community that I told you about, in my daddy's church, okay? Bethel AME. So be clear about that, okay? Before the war, there were blacks that had studied in Europe. And when you study in Europe, it isn't so much the university as under whom you study. So at this time, nobody knew under whom I should study if I was going to go to Europe to school. So a German Jew who was a friend of the family was a psychologist, and he said to my father, send Edwin to Kretschmer at Tübingen, because I'll have to do a practicum. And Kretschmer had his own hustle that he did with industry. Okay? I have 1 year of college German in Canada, which is generally about, in Canada, you go to school in October and April, you're out. So that's, and then you have a long month for Christmas. So you can see there wasn't very much time in school. It's just very concentrated. All right. I arrive. When I get there, now you have to remember that I don't know the language. I'm learning the language. I had this little basic text. But when you hear university lectures, they're going like that, and the vocabulary and things. And then I used to just kind of sit there and stare and say, oh, there's a word I know. Oh, there are two I know, what have you. Then finally, all of a sudden, it just clicked. I don't know why or how it happened, but everything just was automatic. I had no questions in my mind about what was going on. It just all fit. I don't know. I think that was the grace of God. That's it. Now, when you finish, now, I did practicum at Mercedes-Benz and Zeiss Icon Camera Company. All right? You couldn't do a better practicum. But being black, I knew there would be a semicolon, however, comma when I came back for a job. And that would be, do you have any practical experience? So I do private work for Kretschmer and get private experience. So it's a job that I'm doing. So I have the practica and I have the job experience. Now I come back, and a guy that I had supervised, he was a Hans, okay, had gone to Cleveland, and he worked in this private company, looking at how we do industrial psychology here. This was a consulting company. He introduced ideas to them that because the Germans were ahead of us, we're still doing, left hand, right hand, how much light, all these crazy things. The Germans had all that with the forced labor from the war. So he had all that data, that all written down. Now they were doing different things. So he introduced it, but he has to go back to get he's done now his practicum. He's got to go back to do his degree. And he's getting ready to go, and they're screaming, oh, no, don't go. You don't have to have the degree. Well, just stay here, white boy. Okay? And he says, my supervisor, Edwin Nichols, lives in Detroit. He's just returned from Germany. You might give him a call and see if he'd be willing to come over and work for you. Well, he told him a lot of things about me, but when I arrived, it was quite clear that he had not told him everything about me, okay? So when I get there, this woman is typing. Oh, she's just typing, okay? And as she's typing, she finally, in Europe, to get attention, you clear your throat. She just kept typing. It was like, put the package down and go on, boy, And so after having cleared my throat, she didn't respond. I dropped my keys on her desk. That's like, pay attention. She looked, what do you want? I said, I'm Nichols to see Mr. Green with reference to the position of psychologist. The person we want is German. I said, German or German speaking? And now this is where Nichols loses it. If you try to credential me, I have Christian charity for most things, but don't try to credential me when you don't have the credentials, okay? So she says something like, sprichst du Dutch or something, some horrible mixture of nothing, okay? I lost Christian charity. I said, I do speak German, but it's obvious you don't. Would you be kind enough to get Mr. Green? I go into this room. There are 11 white men sitting in the room. 10 has masters, and the one who runs it has a bachelor's degree. He runs the whole, he's got the money, he makes it. Oh, we're so happy to see you. Hans has told us so much about you. And I'm saying to myself, I know now what he didn't tell you. And we play this game back and forth. They're asking all kinds of questions. And of course, my answer is, have you read? have you read? Quote Levine, have you read? And, and then I give some of the German authors, have you read? And of course that stifles the game playing because they haven't read. Now it's time to go to lunch. And lunch is primarily to see if you have table manners. Now, if you had grown up around my grandmother, you could eat chicken, fried chicken off the bone with a knife and fork, okay? So that gives you a clue, and not get your hands dirty. So, of course, this is not an issue for me. And we go to this quote-unquote French restaurant. And I look at the man who is the maitre d'. He's not Metropolitan French, he's Algerian. And in my broken French, I tell him what's going on. And I recognize that he smiles. He goes into the kitchen and he puts white coats on everybody. Now, when you get, like this is the one who looks like white out front, as you get back in the kitchen, people get darker. Put the white coat on them, everybody's coming out to serve. They had never had a lunch like that. Everything's flaming and pouring and what have you. So we get back, and then my German training says, demonstrate German training from this Nazi. So I went around the room and I told them about habits that they all had. Okay, here's a man who smokes. He smokes cigars. Here's a man who from the Sinton. This is a man who has trouble with his feet because his shoe balance, the backs of the shoes are done. See, I had observed all these things because when you're trailing someone as a spy, you're trying to keep up with them. You have to. They could take the coat off and the hat off, but you can't change the shoes. So the heels of the shoes tell you how to follow when all this other accidentals have been changed. See, he was a big-time Nazi, Fowler. All right? So after telling them that, they excused, and he tells me, I'm very sorry, Mr. Nichols. I can't hire as much as we would like to because the woman secretary said she would quit before she would work in an office with Negroes. Now, here's to let you know, we always talk about the object being the highest value in European culture, and that you count and measure objects. The next day at the YMCA where I was staying, that's where young men stayed at that time, there was a package. The package came for me. What package is this? And I opened it, and there was all the work that Hans had not done. The letter said, complete the work that Hans has not completed. Enclosed is a check. Fill in your fee, cash it. Parentheses, send the work back, do not bring it back. Okay? Now, I had envisioned many orifices in which he could stuff his check. I didn't need it. Okay? All right? Now, I'm not proud, so what did I have for a job? I was a short order cook from 11 o'clock at night to 7 in the morning on 55th Street, which is the heart of the black ghetto in Cleveland. And the woman who ran it was a big black woman, okay? Big, all right? Now that's where you run into where black people discriminate against themselves, colorism and hair texture. My competition was a Creole. He wasn't handsome, he was pretty. He had the soft hair, he had the light eyes, and he was high yellow. He wasn't just yellow, he was high yellow, okay? So everything that he had, of course, Nichols did not have. I had nappy hair, I had big lips and a big nose, and it's like meringue, it ain't yellow, okay? We're in competition. Friday comes, and of course there's no McDonald's or anything like that, so you gotta get the food in, get it going. She says, cut up the chickens. And this guy, now here's the breast of a chicken. You know he doesn't know how to cut up chicken. He's trying to cut this way into the breast. He has no idea. She says, Nichols, do you know how to cut up? I said, what do you want? Halves or quarters. I just took all my aggression out on these chickens, cutting them up, salting and pepper, flouring, and getting ready to fry, okay? Then she looks to him and she said, honey, you go on home. I'll see you when I get there. See, I didn't know what the game was. I didn't know what the game was. So you see, even when you're getting hell from the whites, sometimes with colorism and hair texture, we get it from our own. Okay? And it isn't how you see me, it's how I see myself in relationship to others. Some people will say, oh, Nichols, you're fair. Well, yeah, but I ain't Creole. Okay? So you see that it's always, where do you see it? And when you ask people in a family, which one is lighter and which one's darker. And you're looking, you could say they're all dark, you know, but they'll say, oh, that's the black one. Well, now, how does that child feel in that family? See, these are the crimes that we commit against ourselves. We have to get past this. You know, if you want hair, now everybody knows you can buy it. You know, whatever color you want is how you can buy it. Okay, you can have it. And complexion, you know, you see all these beautiful models now. They're in all shades. And why all shades are getting being shown on television? Because you're selling cosmetics to meet all those shade distinctions. When I was growing up, there was one thing called Natanola, and that was right around here. So now that gives you an idea of what it was like to try to get a job. And what I did with the short order cooking. I worked 7 days a week. I worked, 6 days a week. That was Saturday, Sunday, Friday, Saturdays, and the weekends. I had Tuesday off, I think it was. And you have all these other things you have to do to survive. At the master's level, the reality is, in my mind, you're not getting jobs because you don't have the doctorate. You've got to get the doctorate. So, it's a very interesting story. I take PhD level classes at Loyola on Saturday. I drive from St. Charles, Illinois, for delinquent boys into the city. That's where I was working. I left Cleveland and came to work in a delinquent home. It's like an institution for delinquent boys at St. Charles in Illinois. I drive on Saturdays into Chicago, take classes at Loyola. It's a sunny day, and I'm walking down Michigan Avenue, and my eye catches, I'd walked down there many times, and my eye catches a sign, and it says, Österreichisches Botschaft, the Austrian embassy. I look at that, and I'm thinking, how can I get back to Europe to finish my doctorate? I can't get a Fulbright because my undergraduate was not an American school. It's a Canadian school, okay? So I go upstairs Saturday, and the man, I'm knocking at the door, and the man kind of does like this, and he points to the sign, it's closed. And I just stand there. And he's flooding papers, and he looks up, and I'm still standing there. And so he finally comes to the door, and he says, in English, and I address him in German. And that kind of breaks the barrier. He said, my goodness, I just got this paper from Austria, and they have the scholarships that they're giving you. They give 10 to all the world. Would you like to apply? I said, yes. So I got one of the 10 for alle Welt, okay? I have an Austrian scholarship. I go back to Innsbruck. Now, I know if I go to Vienna, I'll never be a doctorate because I'll party myself crazy. So I go to Innsbruck. And Innsbruck has this very famous professor called Ivo Kohler. Brilliant man. I work under him. I also work in the hospital during the clinics, you know, the testing and psychotherapy with the mentally ill patients. All right? So I've got everything going. Now, when I graduate with honors, and I come back home. That's when I go to Flint, Michigan for a second time. First time with the masters, they said nothing, and then they came back over my papers again after I had gone to Illinois to work. They had to really want me because they called my mother and asked her how to get in touch with me in Illinois. You know, so they really wanted me. Now remember, this is rotary telephone time, all right? And a letter, okay? I drove from Illinois to Flint, Michigan. They were very excited and very pleasant. Then I get a letter back saying, this is your per diem. I think it was $75 or $79, something for the gas going back and forth. And unfortunately, they couldn't hire me now because they didn't have any office space. Does that compute? No. All right. So now I'm back, and once again, Flint, Michigan, you have General Motors College, and they want to develop apprenticeship programs. That is my PhD, apprenticeship programs, and how to test to get people for various aspects of their vocations. All right? I send all these papers again. Oh, the man is just ecstatic, hugs me on the phone. I'm not identifiable on the phone as black. So he just, oh, he's so ecstatic. I drive up there, and he comes out of the car to meet me. And he's a little cool. And we go in and we talk, and I'm all excited about the job and everything. This is Flint. My home is Detroit. I'm just excited. Well, uh, I said, well, is there anything that I'm missing? Do you want something else? He says, you have everything that I wanted and even more than I could have hoped for. But you should not have applied. You're a Negro. Well, that kind of, so what is all this about? And that's when I began to try to develop the paradigm. Because I returned to the mother science philosophy. Because all this science and psychology and sociology, that doesn't give an answer. So being trained in the European tradition, the mother science is philosophy. So I say, well, I need to go back and look at philosophy, see what I can find. Well, I had studied a lot about Japanese culture. And I realized that the most thing that they prize most is group cohesiveness. They do everything in groups and how it works. And I understood it, but I hadn't placed it in a philosophical context. See, it was still something like sociology or a psychological way of behaving. Then I had studied Herder in Germany. And Herder tells us that the origins of people, where they come from at the very beginning of their culture, is what shapes their language, their behavior, all these things. Then, in the Psychology Today, that's a magazine that used to come out, I see an article that's talking about a brief conversation with Thomas Lambo. Thomas Lambo is a Yoruba from Nigeria, and he is the first Western-trained psychiatrist in Britain, and I'm sure in all of Africa. His specialty was the development of the observance of developing schizophrenia in children. When I was at the Menninger Foundation in Topeka, Kansas, after I got my doctorate, I was working there. That was the big place to work at that time, because the people from Hollywood, the stars, would come and hide in Topeka to be treated and then go back to California. Okay? Now, I see this man walking in his buba. That's this big thing that they wear. But instead of it being silk or cotton, this one is made out of wool. So it's like a blanket walking. The snow is knee deep. And he's trudging through the snow in Kansas. And you see this powerful looking black man. And he's a scholar in residence. So he teaches us while he's there. Now, he doesn't know me from Adam's house cat, but he finally, when I read this is the thing that gave me what I needed. And I'll just read it to you. This is a Dutch interviewer, and he asks, "It is a system that differs considerably from Western practices. Are there broader cultural contrasts between Africa and the West that might account for the differences?" Lambo, I think so. And they have to do with an orientation toward life. Reality for Africa is found in the soul, not objects. The aim of life is not to master oneself or outer things, but to accept a life of harmony with other beings or on a spiritual scale. Africans believe in the relationship between men and men, or man and man. Okay? African philosophy bases on exemplification of manhood relationship. Western philosophy is based on science, and we will see that the reality is object, the individual to the object and its acquisition. I didn't need anything else. That's axiology. So I said, oh, that's axiology. It's not sociology. It's not psychology. It's axiology. Then I put those in place. Now comes the big task. If you're going to know something about a person, you have to know, first of all, what is their value, but you have to know how they know things and how they reason to an answer. So it's epistemology and logic. Now that took some time. It was quick to get what was the European, because I'm raised in the European system. And the Europeans always go back to a Greek. So Democritus says there are all these little parts that come together. So that's parts to the whole. It's linear and sequential. Count and measure. That's their epistemology. It took a little while to grasp the black one. Because he talks about spirituality here, you see. So it's spirituality, but how do you make that or manifest it in a way of knowing, which is intuition. We intuit a lot of things. That's the verb. Intuition is the noun. So we intuit a lot of things. You hear people say, "My mind told me, but I didn't know. My mind told me." Well, that's your intuition. And the more you become attuned to it, the more information you get from time to time. But we block it out because we can't count it and measure it, and we can't count on it to come just like that when we want it. It comes when it wants to come. You see? When it's propitious for us to know something, it will tell us. All right. Now, that's the spiritual part, symbolic imagery, and rhythm. Now, rhythm isn't clapping your hands, it's the biorhythms, but it took a long time before Western culture realized that the organs in the body have their own rhythm. And the biggest one that caused problems was they would bombard the liver for liver cancer before the liver had performed its functions for the day. All right, the liver says, "I'm going to work to do liver things from 7 to 10. Then after 10, you can do what you need to do." Well, the clinic opens at 6:30, and at 7 o'clock, the patient's on the table, and we reel him in, and we start bombarding the liver. But we don't know the cycles of the liver. We don't know its rhythm. The logic system, dichotomous logic. That's what white people use all the time, either or. Yes or no. And it's binary, 0 or 1. There's nothing wrong with it. But it becomes dangerous when they use it to form isms. When they say this is good and this is bad, men are good, women are bad, white is good, black is bad. Well, you've got sexism and you have racism. Just by putting those two dependent variables in the place of a dichotomous logic. Now what they do for artificial intelligence is you'll have the far right wing and the far left wing, and every newspaper article and everything that comes out runs you right down the rabbit hole for that particular way of thinking. They never join into each other because they're all going down this rabbit hole. Now, Vernon Dixon he's dead now. He's been dead for a number of years, but he's a brilliant man, and everyone should always make reference to him. He comes up with the coinage for unital logic. At first, he thought it was epistemology, and I beat him over the head and said, "No, it is not. It is logic." So he finally consented, and it is the logic that we use as black people, because it's the concept of two things ostensibly in opposition must work themselves to union. Now, because I put Latinx and Afro-Arabs in the same box with us as blacks, do those two systems have this logic system? Latinx, diphracismo, that's Aztec's logic. Ibn Arabi writes this major work, and his logic system is the in-between. I got it. Now the rest of them just go very quickly. Okay? The most difficult was trying to I understood intellectually, but I couldn't put it together in terms of the Chinese, what they do in Asian culture. Their epistemology is you must be able to see the whole and all of the parts simultaneously. Now that's the whole in parts I got for a long time, but that simultaneously took months for me to come to the reality. You cannot read a Chinese character if you cannot see the whole frame, the Gestalt, and the position of each stroke, where it is and how it works. But you have to see all of that simultaneously, or you can't read Chinese. You see? You can't go ch, p, f, it's not there. There are no phonics there. They are just lines and strokes. And you can have one form that looks exactly the same, except one line goes this way, and another line goes that way. And they're completely two different words. They have nothing to do with each other. It's not like this is the root, I mean, this is the root and the stem. This is the stem, and we have all these prefixes and suffixes and so on. It doesn't work that way. You have to be able to see the character, position of each stroke, and it has to be done simultaneously or you cannot read. Now, once that was done, I was on my way, and I made my first presentation of this to the Psychiatric Association. World Psychiatric Association was meeting in Ibadan at that time, and I was a visiting professor at the University of Ibadan. And that's when the first time I presented that. And I don't have that paper with me. Later on, I'll give you the date of that. And subsequently, there have been others that have tried to use parts of it and what have you. But the major document is my initial work, my contribution to the field. It's unfortunate, but we have to politicize our children. They have to know that they know differently from what the teacher is teaching. And I'll give you an example. At the end of the teacher's manual, at the very back of the book, are the methods, the pedagogy for teaching it. For this particular problem, there are 7 steps. And if you do all 7 steps, then you can solve the problem. Now, these are the 7 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's what the teacher wants. That's linear and sequential. But Leroy doesn't think that way. Leroy is a holistic thinker. And he solves problems with critical path analysis. Now, in the vernacular, that is, he gets the big picture and he cuts to the chase. All right, the teacher's asking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He turns in his paper and he has done 1, 4, and 7. She says, where's 2 and 3? Well, this is 1, this is 2 for him, and this is 3 over here. Where is it? He doesn't conceptualize that. Because his critical path analysis, this is the fastest way to get the answer. Now, her attitude is, if you don't do all 7, I can't check your work. But if he gets the right answer, what's the issue? Well, you haven't followed the steps. And so they're penalized because they don't follow the steps. And because the teacher doesn't realize that he is a holistic thinker and uses critical path analysis. Now, what she accuses him of, cheating, and she has him standing in front of the whole class. She accuses him of cheating. And she says, stop lying in the class and sit down. Well, if the highest value is in the relationship, what has happened to this little boy in front of all his friends? This teacher has called him a liar and told him to sit down. The relationship is destroyed. He becomes her worst nightmare because he acts out in class. Now, acting out gives her the opportunity to say he's immature and put him into the special ed classes. And when you go to any prison, when you look at 5 black or Hispanic men, 3 of them have been in special ed. Now, when you give them a full psychological battery, they should never have been in special ed. So you see, these are the things that we have to be conscious of as parents. Whenever I give this example, we have people come up with tears in their eyes. Women said, I just knew it was something, I couldn't put my finger on it. That happened to me. I had one man standing up, and he's 6-something, and he's standing up there, and tears are coming down. He said, that's what happened to me. And now he has an answer. We have to politicize our children in terms of what is going to happen to them in the world as well as what's happening to them in school. I was a psychotherapist. I don't do individual psychotherapy now. It's too confining. But for a long time, I did psychotherapy right here in the Washington, D.C. area. And a couple that lived out in Columbia, Maryland. Now, Columbia, Maryland is a planned community for middle-class people. No lower class, middle class. Okay? The homes cost enough for middle class. It's almost like two income. You know, the wife is a lawyer and the father's a doctor, or they both for, GS-15s working for the government or something like that. Okay? And they wanted, it's an integrated community. So you have blacks and whites. Everybody moves out to Columbia. Well, this couple, now the mother is fourth generation teacher. The man is third generation teacher. They teach in the public school system here in the district. And they drive the 14 miles, whatever it is, out to Columbia. That's where their little boy is in school. Now, the teachers that teach there don't make enough money to live there. So now what do you think their attitude is about little black children who live there? You have taken something away from me. You don't deserve it. Now, how do they do it? This little boy was talented and gifted from nursery school to kindergarten to first grade, second grade. Now, third grade, 8 years of age, this is the time when they break the backbone of black boys and cast them aside. He is taken out of talented, gifted, and he's not able to be a part of it. He's very upset, his parents are. And they're thinking there's something wrong with their child. So they bring him to Dr. Nichols, child psychologist. I listen to this little boy, I look at this little boy. I said, oh, smart little boy, nothing wrong with him. He does a couple drawings for me. Trying to figure out what is wrong. And then it hits me. Why would you take him out of talented and gifted when he's been in nursery school, kindergarten, first, second grade, and now third grade, you're taking him out? I said to him, when the teacher asks a question, who knows the answer first? I do. I said, I bet I know what you do. He said, what? I said, you just raise your hand. He said, how'd you know? I said, I know. I said, but I bet the teacher doesn't call on you. How did you know? I said, and then I know what you do. What do I do? I said, you blurt out the answer. How did you know? A little thing like this. I want to say it because I've been black a long time, but that's the inappropriate answer to this little boy. I said, I'm going to get you back in, don't you worry about it, I'm going to get you back in your talented and gifted class. Now, this is where, if I had not been aware of what was going on in that kind of setting, in terms of where, how are you going to tell all these little white children that they are superior when the one black child is the top of the class, gets everything right first? It's cognitive dissonance. You can't do it. So remove the source. Now, her reason to remove him was because he was immature. He just spoke out in class. I said, I'm going to get you back, but we're going to play a game. He said, what's the game? I said, well, I'll teach you. Tell me what the game is. Tell me what the game is. I said, okay. When the teacher gives a question, I want you to write down the answer. Turn the paper over. Let her call on all the boys in the class, and finally, when somebody gets it, you just hold it your paper. Don't say a word. Just put it back down. He loved that game. He said, oh, that's going to be a wonderful game. I'm going to play that game. Now, you have to deal with the structure itself. You have an institution, the Educational Institute. You have to deal with it. So I made an appointment with the principal. I'm Dr. Nichols, in charge of child and family mental health from the National Institute of Mental Health. So I'm credentialed. You want to count them and measure it. See the object, count and measure. I've said the object and what I am. And I'm coming to discuss a case with you because I'm the psychotherapist for the family's child. Oh, come right on. When I get there, I lay it out for him. My first question is counting and measuring the object. What are the credentials of the person that removed this young man from talented and gifted to Is she certified as a counselor or as a psychologist? What is her training? She has a bachelor's degree in education. She doesn't have a master's. She doesn't have it in. You see what I'm doing? I'm hitting them right back with the way they do things. Count and measure objects. She doesn't have it, therefore she's not qualified. I said, why on earth would you have an unqualified person making such a life-changing decision? Okay. I said, now, I want to tell you that this little boy's father is third-generation educator. His mother's fourth-generation educator. And they're quite concerned about this behavior that's happening to their son. And I'm telling them that I can handle it, but if I can't, they have their lawyer. Okay? You see what I'm doing? Okay? Now, I said, I have to talk to the teacher. Oh, we don't do that. I said, I have to talk to her. I go to her. My first thing is, we're going to talk. And what white women do ordinarily is they start crying. But don't start crying because it has no effect on me at all. You are a racist. I said, no crying. You're racist. I said, now you have a problem. You can't live here because you don't make enough money to live here. That's number one. Number two, you have a little black boy who's smarter than all these little white kids in the class, and you can't tell them they're superior when he's smarter than all of them. And you cripple him. You don't call on him. Well, he blurts out the answer. Says the reason he blurts them out because you don't call on him. Well, if I called on him every time, nobody else would get a chance. See, nobody else would get a chance. I said, well, I've given him some new techniques for being, to not blurt out behaviors in the class. He'll be very, very silent. You'll have no problems with him. I didn't tell him she's going to do this, okay? I said, now, I will be checking on him often. And if I find that you're doing anything to cripple this child, I'll make sure that his parents get a lawyer to correct your behavior or see to it that you lose your job. So I'm dealing with objects that you can count and measure because I'm dealing with a white woman. I had to deal with one-on-one relationships with this little boy, get him to understand what was going on, to politicize him. Regrettably, that's what we have to do. And you were talking to me earlier about black crime, black kids shooting each other and all this kind of thing. Well, as I was telling you before, my tactic is when you get two sides, these young guys staring at each other, ready to kill each other, I say, where do you live? I tell them. I said, do you pay rent or do you own the building? We pay rent. I said, well, if the landlord says move, what do you have to do? Move. I said, well, where's your territory? What do you own? What do you own? Nothing. And then I talk about, well, what is trauma? What is generational trauma? We begin to talk about, where do you live? What is your home life like? Do you know anything about your grandparents or great-grandparents that were slaves? What did they go through? What did they live? Okay? That's it. So once you do that, they begin. Now you have to have them in a group, like you have in your literature that you have. You have to have them in a group so they can work through things in a group, and in that way, there's group cohesiveness, and that's when you have to balance things that are going on in that group, and the group supports you when you need it, and they jump on you when you're wrong, but it's a loving environment. Okay, nobody's outdoing you or out. I'm gonna get you. Nobody's dissing you. It's just a loving group working together. And from my way of thinking, more can be done in that sort of thing. And when you look to see where a man who was incarcerated or something goes back to the community and talks and gets a small group of guys that he talks to and works with, they don't have any issues. But it's the ones that he can't reach because of his little group. These are kids who want to be. And the others are outside because they don't feel that they fit anywhere. They just remain angry. Well, like I told you, if you're in a small apartment and you sleep on the couch in the living room and everybody's watching TV until 3 in the morning, when do you get to sleep? And if they're smoking grass or whatever, What are you breathing? Finally, you get to go to sleep. Have you had a bath? Have you had dinner? The only food you're going to get is at noon, free lunch. With its free lunch, how is that stabbing you in the heart? You see? You don't want people to see you going for the free lunch and taking the bag home. A lot of places disguise that now, so you won't have that feeling. And they give breakfast, lunch, and a snack to take home because they know there are kids that don't have it. Okay? Now, the point that I'm making here is that we have to begin to look at our children as positives with trauma. There's a positive spiritual self in there, but it's trapped and coated in layers and layers and layers of crap that you have to wash it away to find the person in there. And that's generational trauma. The mother's traumatized. At Howard University, they used to have a support class, support like a talking group of people supporting each other. It was for grandmothers 30 and younger. Now stop. A grandmother 30 and younger means you've been having children at 13, 14. 14 and 14 is 28. 15 and 15 is only 30. How on earth are you going to grow as a child coming from that background? You have children trying to raise children. Here's a 30-year-old grandmother. 30-year-olds, they're out partying. Or at least they want to. Now they're stuck with this grandchild. What kind of vibes is he getting from this environment? And she went off and dumped you on me. So we can't be critical of our community. We have to go in and work to cure it. And the work that you showed me today is right on target. It's a tinderbox. It can, a flint can set it off. Like you have shavings here and you do flint and it'll light. That flint is what makes it vulnerable. And that's when you have the friction between people. Because you see, I'm already geared up for something. I haven't slept, I haven't eaten, I haven't had a bath. All this crap is going on around me, plus, what else is going on around me. And I'm sitting here. Somebody says, go in the kitchen and do your homework. Well, where are you going to sit at the table? Who's at the table? Somebody said, get out of the way so I can cook the meal. Okay, well, then where are you going to go? Okay. When you read A Raisin in the Sun, the only place that people felt safe for a few minutes was in the bathroom because there were so many people trying to get in there. But if you could get in there and close the door, you could have some solace. So the idea is that we have to develop ways in which we reach these children and help them to recognize the trauma that they're in. See, I'm fine. Ain't nothing wrong with me. Ain't nothing wrong with me. I'm fine. But when you scratch that surface, then you begin for them to let some of that pus of the sore out and start to cry because they're recognizing it. It's not going to come easy because the denial is there. Ain't nothing wrong with me. I'm fine. It's him. But then you begin to ask questions like, well, and I always start with slavery. I don't start with your mama and right, that's too close. Because I didn't want you talking about my mama. So I said, well, how many, you got a mama and so forth, and then you have a grandmother and great-grandmother and great-grandpa. He said, no, that sounds like that set of grandparents, they were slaves. So now, what does that mean to be a slave? What does it mean to be a chattel slave? I said, do you like your little sister? Do you like her? Yeah. I said, well, what would happen if you came home and they weren't there? And your mother's crying and she told you that they sold her. What you mean? They sold. Didn't you? You didn't know they sold people? Yeah. Sold them all the time. Because you are now 7 and you're big enough to go work in the fields, pick cotton. So your mom ain't going to keep you. I don't believe that. Well, let's look at Sojourner Truth's biography. Her mother, her 2 little brothers were out there playing in the snow in New York State. You hear the jingle bells ringing and the sled is pulling up. And the mother tries to get the children. They come in, and this is a cellar. So it has these doors that close like that. They open for the cellar. The white men open the door, come down, and take the 2 little boys, put them in the sled, and the kids are screaming and crying. And Sojourner Truth is looking like, why don't my parents go get her? And the father says to the mother, be quiet, because you know what happened on the other plantation when the children wouldn't go. They took the little boy and by the ankles and pushed his head out. That's in Sojourner Truth's chapter 1 of her autobiography. Now you see you have a child who has a completely different idea about, well, what, and you say, well, now, how do you think that carries over to the next group of people, the children of that? One is soul, one is here. What was the biggest thing you think black people did after slavery? They tried to find their relatives. You see all these ads in newspapers. I didn't know that. I said, well, you don't read. Well, now, Dr. Nichols, I said, well, I got a library. How should you have to do some reading? Then we talk about, well, some people don't read too well. Well, that ain't got nothing to do with it. You can listen on tape. Or I know somebody will teach you how to read. So you're getting at their issues and you're bringing them, you're awakening in them something that is different from what they see out here all the time. And you're giving them the idea that there's more than one job than being the basketball star and the football star. Somebody broke that down into, how many are in college and how many get to the national leagues and how many last, and what have you. It's like 4 or 5 or 6, some unheard of number. So that isn't a viable thought process. But how many get to do the new AI? That's where it is. That's where the money is. That's good money, but you got to learn it. What I find very often is that we don't communicate. And now that sounds trite, but we don't. We don't talk to each other. We don't share. We may talk a little bit, but we really don't. There's not that intimacy of sharing. There is a picture of a black couple, elderly with gray hair, sitting at a kitchen table, probably just post-slavery, and there's a little tin box on there, and they have pennies that they're counting. That, to me, is the intimacy of sharing. Question: do you know how much your wife makes? Does she know how much you make? Okay. Now, in the black culture, you have to recognize that is our money and my money. She has her money, and then there's our money. And if you don't confuse the two, thinking that her money is our money, no, her money is her money. And if you can accept that reality, then things work better. Now, the modern couples that I've run into, see, when I came along, I paid all the bills. I paid everything. And then she had her money, but I paid everything. Now, the newer couples, half and half. These are the bills, you pay this half, and I pay this half. And that's how they're doing it. And then she may have some of hers over there, too. But the bills are, you come into it with the bills are paid. Now, other issues that come up are issues that we don't talk about that hurt us. How many times have you been beaten to death in the office or wherever you're working with these white people, and you come home and you run into something that you feel is trivial or doesn't matter, and there's a yelling and screaming, and you're taking out your anger on her rather than dealing with the anger. Okay? Now, some people come and say, I can't talk right now. I need to go in and kind of get it down. Give me a drink or something. Let me go settle. Can't deal with it right now. Now, if you can respect that, or the other person can respect that, then it gives you time to separate that from this that's going on here. And the other thing I tell people is that when you marry, before you marry, there's some traits that the person has that are just a little annoying. And you think, we can correct that. No, it gets worse. Okay? Now, my parents were married for 68 years before my father died. But you know what would drive my father up the wall? He's sitting down to eat, and my mother takes her fork and puts it into his plate. And he just about loses it. And she said, I just want to taste it. He says, if you want it, you get your own. I mean, here, you could have your own. Don't, you know, I'll order. If you're in a restaurant, I'll order what you want. You can, no, I just want to taste it. It would drive him insane. It's the only time I'd see him upset. He'd really just be like, ah, you know. And it was, now what was the deal? She was just tasting a little bit of food. But for him, that was, you know, never. Now, in terms of order in the house, my mother could tell you, go upstairs in the guest room, look in the dresser, go down the third drawer, in the lower right-hand side of the drawer, or the right-hand side of the drawer, you'll find a sheet, a pillowcase, or what have you, or you'll find sweaters or what have you. Now, when you grow up in that household, and you look at my kitchen, that my son has come home with his family and how they live, things are just, you know. Now, if I were in a marriage, you see how much conflict there'd be. You have to be open about what bugs you. You have to say, this bugs me. And they'll like, get over it. And you think, I'm trying, but this bugs me. Now, then when you respect those two things, that's the important thing. There's a term called charisma, a charismatic leader. If I put on a disc with Malcolm X talking right now, he wouldn't be talking to us. He would be talking to me and to you and to you and to you, because he's addressing me, not us. That's charisma. And that's why you have these mega churches and this pastor, because when he preaches to me. You see? And so we get charismatic leaders not very often, but they kill them, assassinate them as soon as possible, because they have too much power. Being charismatic it's only a few people that really have that power. Martin Luther, Malcolm. These are people that kill. A lot of, when you give these explanations, like I talked about with working with the children, they come to a reality that all that they carry with them as these negative traits and so forth have an origin. And then they have to learn control for anger control, these kinds of things. But once you understand what was down here that could be making you act the way you are, then you have control over whether you're going to act it out or not. So once I know all the dynamics of what went on and all of that, then I'm able to now say, I have a choice. I can continue this way, or I can make a change. Now, what am I going to do at this point in my life? And you see, this is when you have prisoners that have been in 20, 30 years, and they make a choice that now, even in prison, I'm going to be a different person. And they become, really kind of the host of the prison, because any new guys coming in, they're the ones that talk to them, address them, helping them adjust and to make, when you're going to jail for 30, 40 years, there's a lot of adjustments that have to be made. Psychologically, get in a cell, claustrophobia, anything. And you ain't gonna cry. You can't cry. Well, you might cry, but you don't want anybody to see it. Then there's the sexual abuse that goes on. So all these things that happen now, Someone has to take the responsibility. Now, that's why Elijah Muhammad was so successful. In Jackson Prison, if you joined Islam, whatever who was in charge of in the prison at that time, then you would not be sexually violated by any of the men in the prison. So you have a lot of guys running to Islam because of the protection in the prison. And of course, once you're indoctrinated, well, you're in. And if you look at the indoctrination methods that he used, don't get into all the other things, but the process by which he did things, you'll see ways to bring a community from to. He brought people from to. Now, he loved women and he had his other problems, but he had, when you really study it, he had a process by which and he had an economic process. There are two things that he did that I think people don't really give him credit for. And one was the newspaper. He was able to print in each city that newspaper on the same day. Ordinarily, you'd print all of them in New York, and then as the train went along, you'd distribute them. But he had a way through telephone that he could have the information was going into the press, put on the press here, and Chicago would print it, LA would print it, Detroit would print it, and it all come out on the same day. Not a ton of it done in New York and then on the train as it goes across the country, so you'd get it a week late. It's all on the same day. He also did international commerce. Chile had tons of fish. Nobody bought it because you were buying it from New England, okay? Ireland, places like that. They had tons and tons of fish. He contracted with them to bring the fish. So any place in the country, you could have fresh fish on Friday because the men stand out there holding a whole string of fish. I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember that. Yeah, well, he did that. I have been going out to Seattle for many years. I first started going out there with the National Institute of Mental Health, which would have been around 68, 69. And because I was developing the child mental health programs in the state. And then the black organizations that would invite me at another time to come out and make, lectures and what have you. So I would have maybe 4 or 5 lectures in a day that I'd go from one organization to another to another. And I began to see this person, I'd have this German observation, and here that I saw once and again and what have you. And that's when I realized that she was, so that's when I asked her, I said, "Are you following me?" And she was embarrassed because she wanted to hear me, but she didn't have the money to buy. Each one of these conferences, you have to pay to go in. And so she'd take a clipboard and walk right on through. But I began to see her, so I said, "Well, here, you'll be my assistant." And so that's how we met. Now, what Joy did, which is tremendous in terms of how I think about things, she said, if the axiology for blacks is that the highest value lies in the relationship, just on that alone, I'm going to go into a school that has a whole class of disturbed children. Okay? One little girl sat with a sweater over her head the whole semester. Every day when they came into class, she established a relationship by meeting them at the door, hugging them and telling them hello and how are you and calling them by their name. That's establishing a relationship. So she said, if that's true, then I should be able to change the behavior. And within a very short time, she modified the behavior. The kids were learning, and everybody's trying to figure out what is she doing. But she worked at establishing the relationship. If kids get out of, start acting out or what have you, instead of, stop and blah, 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 she would say, "Come here. Now, do you still like me?" "Yeah, I don't like you." Well, let's talk about it. So she would work with the child on the relationship. She did some work. She printed some material, and it's one of the most valuable pieces of work that you'll see, because just that idea, if that's true, then it should work. And it did. It did. Now, when she was ready to do she decided she wanted to do psychology. She was already a social worker. She goes to the I don't know, Seattle School of Psychology. There are these schools of psychology all over the country, the Chicago and the California. There's a corporation that's called the Schools of, whatever the state is. They give a PhD. They give a doctorate of education. They also give a doctorate of PhD. Or it's a PsyD they give, a psychological doctorate, and then a PhD, doctor of philosophy. They give those two. Well, she won the PhD. And that's when she had come to the realization of a post-traumatic slave syndrome. And she had written a paper and was going to propose this as her doctoral dissertation. Well, the people that run that particular center were petrified. They gave her a terminal master's and excluded her from the PhD program based on what she wanted to do. So, count and measure, she filed suit, got some money. Because she has been, as a social worker, she had been teaching classes at Portland State University in the School of Social Work. That's how good she was then. She goes there to do her doctorate. And she does her doctorate. I said, I want you to tell me the names of the people that are going to be on your examining committee. Tell me a little something about it. And I heard one, and I got, this is intuition. I said, that woman is going to be your nemesis. I said, she's going to come after you like a storm. Be prepared. And the way you're prepared, you read everything that she's written, and you quote back to her what she asks you. She did. This woman was so virulent, coming after her, that the other members of the committee said, stop. Now you know how publicly bad that must have been for the members of the committee to say, you stop. You're out of control. But Joy had the answer. She said, well, in paragraph so-and-so of your most recent publication, you said, count, measure, parts to the whole, quote it back. Okay? There was a tradition in the South that if as a white man, I would come out to where you lived, and if I wanted that black woman, then I would have her as my mistress. And my grandmother would not be a part of that. So she took her little black boy, my daddy, and moved to Ohio. And I assumed that she must have passed because the jobs that she had would only be for white women. Black women would be a maid or cook or something like that in somebody's home. White women that worked in factories, like the glass factory, this factory, what have you. And those are kind of like the jobs she had. And so she protected him from all that racism and lynching and all those things that were there by bringing him out and giving him an opportunity. And of course, if you're AME and you grow up in Ohio in the 20s, then Wilberforce is the AME school, which gives you more opportunities. That would be the silent one that I would hold on to. And not known much about her and what have you. I have other relatives who are just wonderful. But to think what it meant for her to leave all of her family, relatives, and everyone. And the husband that he was not all he was supposed to be. So she got rid of him, and now here's a single woman raising a child. And there would be times, my father said, that they had a suitcase that just pack and move. And I'm sure that those are the times when she was discovered to be black. So it's that shady part of our culture that we really don't have all the information, but you can see the product of coming out of it. He was, and as the war came on, the World War II, these relatives began to come out of Mississippi to Michigan to get a job, Flint and Pontiac and all those places. I'm 12 years old. A couple of them came from Mississippi, and they didn't have birth certificates, and they couldn't get a job. You have to go to the notary public who fills out papers, who sends it back to the health department in Mississippi, and they send you back a birth certificate. I wrote down white for two of them because they looked white. Now, why did I do that? Well, my cousin said, "You made my daddy an old cracker." I said, "He wasn't an old cracker." Now, why? 12 years of age, I'm thinking, if they put down black, they will take two jobs away from black people. When the rest of them come, those jobs will be taken. If they're white, it doesn't, they're on the other side. They would take away two jobs being black. No, they're white. They got jobs as white. They made almost twice as much money as their other relatives in the same factory. See, I don't know why I knew earlier, but I have always been, I think it's, I was exposed to all kinds of reading and things like that, poetry and, I was really black proud. I'm going to tell you this last story, then we're through. My mother used to take us to the library, which is in walking distance. We lived on Palmer. Library's on Woodward Avenue. We would walk from Palmer and Brush to the library on Library, and then across the street was the Art Museum. Once a month, we would have read 4 or 5 books on some aspect of Africa or something like that. And then we would go to the library and see the animals or the exhibit or whatever it was in that room. Then we would study another room. So we kind of got to see what the different countries were and what they did from the little readings that we did. And we went to story hour. That was another day. Now, I later understood that my grandmother was one says, take them to the library, and because 3 rooms, 2 children yelling and screaming in there, it's going to drive you crazy. So my grandmother said, take them to the library. So we got that. Now, I'm in the library, and we have gone to see, at that time, I think they had a mounted tiger in the Indian room, in the art museum. We saw this tiger. That's, what country is that? India. So I'm in kindergarten. I'm sitting on the rug. They used to have us sit on the rug, and she's reading the story to me, and she says, and little black Sambo in Africa, and the tigers, and I raised my hand, and I said, that's not Africa. There are no tigers in Africa. They're in India. Only the lions are in Africa. She had my mother come to school. She said I was insubordinate. I didn't even know what the word meant. But I knew that if it's tigers, it can't be nobody from Africa. Little black Sambo was Indian.